Well, hello there. Welcome back to another episode here with the Glassy Boy. I'm not the Glassy Boy. That's the Glassy Boy, the 1954 Glasspar G2. In the last video, we stripped, degreased, and cleaned the frame, where we revealed a ton, and I mean a ton, of this orange paint. Everything from the diff, the frame, the brake lines even, and that's where you guys brought in some really good points. Considering we found a sheet of asbestos in the car, it is highly likely that that yellow paint is lead-based. And that is exactly why I love making and sharing these videos with you guys, because sometimes you guys just comment something that I'm like,
whoa, that makes sense.
We had a couple comments that stated that back in the day, the military used to use yellow primer, which makes a lot of sense considering what John, the original builder, did for a living. And somebody also stated that this might be the same yellow paint used on the T6 trainers. So we know two things that are likely to be sure. One is that it's most likely lead-based, and two, that it was some sort of military paint or primer. Anyway, thank you for those of you who commented your little bit of insight, because that's kind of information that dissipates as time goes on. Anyway, in the last video, we spoke about possible changes to the rear suspension that may include a 3-link setup, but just like when we removed the engine, we want to get some general information and measurements before we just go and remove everything. One bit of information that we definitely want to know before we remove and replace these springs with something else is spring rate. The best way or the right way of testing spring rate would be with a spring dyno or a digital spring tester, but we don't have that, so we're gonna do it the ghetto way. We're gonna load the suspension up with weight until we get a drop of 1 inch. We are going to do both front and rear, but I think I wanna start with the rear. So in order to evenly load these springs, voila, perfect. I also put some shims down in the middle just to keep that board from flexing. I mean, that seems pretty stable. So once again, we need to compress both of those coil springs down 1 inch, and that's where things get a little bit complicated. I'm assuming it's gonna take a good 200 to 300 pounds to compress both of those 1 inch, and I don't have any spare weights just hanging around here. What do you guys think, I work out or something? I may have a gym membership, but it doesn't mean I go. Call me Angel Protein Cake. The only thing that I can think of that we have an abundance of and is pretty heavy and pretty consistent is right over there. This is Sarah & Toon's new line of detailing products. Yes, they are at my shop. I already broke my back once unloading and organizing them onto the shelf. Why not do it again? By the way, did you guys know I had a glittery floor? Bet you didn't. So let's see what these boxes weigh in at. Hello? Well, I just swapped these batteries. Come on. We are at just about 28 pounds. So by my calculations, I assume we're gonna be at around 10 to 15 boxes before we get that 1 inch drop. But now it's just time to move 300 or so pounds. But you know what? I run this place. Why the hell do I have to do it? You got it, boss. So in order to measure our movement, we're gonna use this straight edge right here and use this lip right at the center line of the frame to determine that movement. Also, in order to prevent the tire flex from skewing our data, we propped it up on jack stands so the tires are off the ground, and our frame is sitting right at 21 1/4. So we're gonna have Ozzy stack the boxes until we get to 20 1/4. Ahí está la pulgada, jefe. Ow. Oh, sick. Nice. Yep, just about 1 inch. And yes, there are more accurate ways of doing this. We could have even taken out the spring and compressed them one by one, but then you have to make a jig in order to hold it all together for the coil spring not to boing. Alrighty, folks, it looks like we are sitting right at 12 boxes, which if I am mathing correctly, it should be right around 342 pounds. We are right at that 20 1/4 mark. So once again, 342 pounds compressed, both of those springs 1 inch. So what? Considering we might switch out the entire rear suspension, it is good to know what this car was equipped with as a baseline if either we want to stay with the same figures or make some changes. I mean, how else are we gonna know the specifics, what this car was equipped with? Are we gonna look it up online? Anyway, it is good information to know, but now it's time to move on to the front. And this is also where it gets pretty interesting because there isn't a spring per side. Instead, we have a transverse multi-leaf spring, which is just fancy words for an upside down leaf spring, with the center of the arch supporting directly on the center of the front cross member. And I figure this is going to be more of a backbreaker because it doesn't have much give to it. And the main compression that you're seeing is just from the tire flex. So again, in order to evenly distribute this, damn. Voila! Also removed this brake line bracket right here so the piece of wood could sit directly on the frame and not on the brake line, obviously. Once again, supported on jack stands. It's time for Ozzy to do his thing. Okay. Now that we got this leaning tower of Pisa here, it took just about 400 pounds to get that front end down an inch. There has been some ideas thrown around in regards to making that front leaf spring a bit smoother in operation. Well, now it's just time to make them all disappear. Just like that. Oh, man. I know Ozzy lifted those boxes, but for some reason I'm feeling it. But I think we'll get along just fine. Shout out to our friend Ryan Macy for this episode's caffeine. Ryan was kind enough to buy me and Ozzy a strawberry Red Bull from Dutch Bros. Ozzy's a little bit sensitive to caffeine. I think you'll be fine. Anyway, there's been a change of plans. Nothing like smashing your hand on the hydraulic press once in a while. Shout out to Robert Lugo for these wheel dollies. So, the change in plans. So this frame is supposed to get sandblasted and painted for rust protection, but we're going to hold off on that for now. We are likely going to change out the rear suspension for something like a 3-link setup, but there's no point in me sandblasting and painting the frame if I'm going to have to grind it all away in order for me to weld and do the fab work. So in the meantime, while we decide what exactly we're doing with the rear suspension, we have 1,000,001 other things to do to this car, and one of them's hanging from the roof. I'm thinking this would be a great time to set the body back down on the frame now that it is stripped, so we could look at the mounting locations and see what spacers and bushings they need. Because if you guys remember from the disassembly video, there was some questionable bushings and spacers, and a lot of things don't really make too much sense, so we're gonna try to make sense of it. But there's also a giant piece of rust in the way, so let's rearrange. I'm just kidding, sweetheart, I didn't mean to call you that. All right, frame is right underneath the body. The idea is that these dollies will help us make some fine-tune adjustments in order to properly lower the body down right where it needs to go. But there is a couple slight issues. One being my assistant is dead, and 2, there are 4 pulleys, 1 for each corner, and only 1 of me in order to lower all of them down. Not to worry though, because with patience and determination, we can do anything by ourselves. All right, so since this is an all hands on deck situation, we even have the scrappy boy holding one of the ropes. All right, so I've only come down on the rear about maybe a foot, but I'm realizing it's kind of too sketchy to be a one-person job. So to help us out today, because I obviously couldn't do it myself, we found another Mexican.
Howdy.
You guys have seen him before, obviously. Alrighty, so go ahead and get this side. All right, ready? This is so much better with 2 people.
Oh, I'd imagine. It's almost like it makes sense.
All right, we'll stop it right there. Nice. How many Mexicans does it take to put a body on a car? Only one.
If you do one, only one?
Yeah, I think that's good. Okay, now we could kind of see where it needs to go. Or the spring buckets have to align with those circles. It's like a claw machine. Gonna have to go back a little bit. Towards you?
Right.
Okay, now let's align the front. Make sure the fiberglass goes in between the wheel and the frame. And then we sit on the buckets.
I got dragged out of my home to do this. This is against my free will. Please set
No,
down.
we're cutting this off. Right. Well, look who's back. A Glasspar G2 rather than a rolling frame. Shout out to Ralph for coming out and helping us on such short notice. Could not have done it without him. But yeah, body is now back onto the frame. It took a little while, but now every single mounting point aligns with its corresponding hole. If it looks a little taller to you, well, that's because it's on the wheel dollies as well as the suspension is unloaded. There's hardly any weight on the car. It's cool to see the body on without any of the interior stuff, no dash, no floors, no seats, no nothing. We're bare bones here. Obviously a big empty engine bay with a whole lot of room for extra horsepower. Speaking of power, based on the recent conversations I've had with the owner of this car, I'm starting to think his baseline for speed on this car just has to be right above the scrap stang. He keeps on hinting that this will beat the scrap stang in a straight line or around corners. This Glasspar is much lighter than the scrap stang, as well as with the future 3-link it has, it might be really good around the corners. So I know we keep saying we found something interesting with the car, but again, we did. There are 4 mounting points along the body on either side. We have one set of mounting points right under the grill area, and there's another set of mounting points right along this axis on both sides, right about where the sleeping compartment is. And if you're asking yourself, what sleeping compartment? I'd suggest you go watch the first Glasspar video. Then we have 2 more in the door sill area, one right here, as well as one right here, obviously repeated on the other side. And here's one of those interesting bits of information. On the driver's side door sill, there is a spacer that goes right on the underside, sandwiched between the body and the frame, which is very weird because the passenger side does not have one. And you may think, oh, well, maybe the molding process of the actual fiberglass body was a little bit off, so they had to shim it in order for it to be even on both sides. But if we look at the actual door sill, you can't see any frame because it runs in line with the frame. And if we look at the driver door sill, you can see some frame peeking out right there. Peeking out so much even, it got a layer of paint on it. And while we're here, you'll notice something other than the mismatched paint. We do have some stress cracks right along the bottom corner of these door sills. Same thing on the passenger side, as well as the mismatched paint. And that makes me wonder, why are those stress cracks there? Was it a design flaw and it was just weak at that point? Or is there something missing? Or is there mismatched spacers? It could be a billion reasons. And I think we might have found the culprit. We already mentioned the 4 pairs of mounting points in front of the rear axle, but what is holding the body back here? Taking a look at the underside, we will see one of the mounting points right here. And you can see it doesn't really align with anything. In fact, there's a cutout for it to go directly upwards. And my initial thought was maybe there's a bracket that goes in between those 2 mounting points. But if we take a look at the opposite side, you will see that the mounting tab is completely cut off. You can tell it was cut with some sort of angle grinder, I would assume. This one very much can't and didn't mount to anything. So there are mounting points along the frame from here on forward, but the rear is kind of just suspended in the air, pivoting right on the spring buckets. Is that what caused these stress cracks? Or was it the differences between the spacers along the frame? Because the driver's side door sill obviously sits higher than the passenger side door sill. Is that causing a twisting effect? I don't know. It could be either or of those reasons. It could be both, or it could also be neither. But what I do know is that we will try to mend those issues before we permanently reinstall the body back onto the car. But I really wanted to show you guys this. You see, seatbelts are usually attached directly onto a frame, but not the Glasspar. The Glasspar seatbelt is held in by 2 bolts and what looks like to be a piece of a neighbor's fence. In that case, if we need any spare parts for this car, my neighbor just put up a new fence. cedar, I think. Considering it was built in the 50s, I'm surprised it had seat belts at all, but I'm not all that sure how safe this would have been. But then again, the man who built this was a test pilot for newly constructed aircrafts, so... And why does the passenger side seatbelt structure only have one bolt where the driver's side has two? Maybe it's because the passenger side was already equipped with a sleeping compartment, so can't have too much features. That's interesting. Look at, just take a look at this. I was about to start bagging and tagging them, but this one doesn't need any labeling because John left us a little note here that will help us identify these lights. Also, you guys might find it interesting that car from the 50s has a power antenna. Well, that's not that weird, right? Except for the fact that it didn't have speakers nor a radio. Maybe at some point it did, I don't know. So we're kind of just detrimming the things that we would need to remove for paint anyway. And one of those things is this little port right here. Do you guys remember what it was for? There's a special wrench, but I can do it with my fingers too. Voila! Speaking of body, we have a whole lot of body work ahead of us, including quite a bit of fiberglass repair on some of the cracked areas, as well as a whole lot of sanding and some paint involved. And I hope that pleases all of you that wanted me to do some body work on the scrap stang, because I'm not gonna do body work on the scrap stang. You guys can see it here. Speaking of the scrappy boy, we should be getting back on this in the next video. My birthday is coming up in October, so I want to hear this thing and possibly get this thing driving in the month of October. Will be quite of a challenge, but why not attempt to do that? I realize a lot of this video has just been me yapping about this car, but I get more interested the more I work on it. And we actually had one of John's family members reach out to us, and they support these videos as well as what we're doing to this car, so that means the world to me. But with that being said, thank you guys for hanging out. We'll see you on the next one.